Good afternoon, everyone. The first talk after lunch is about to start. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd just like to remind everyone to please use the app to ask questions, and we can go for those at the end. But now it's my pleasure to introduce from Melbourne, Sanjeev. He's here from Cyber Services, and he is talking about mastering the art of attacking and defending a Kubernetes cluster. Please welcome Sanjeev.
All right. So can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. All right. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch break. And mine was pretty good too. So thanks for joining me in today's session. I would be talking about mastering the art of attacking and defending Kubernetes clusters. A lot of attacking and defending mechanisms we'll be talking about. But actually, I would like to start off with a story. So this is about my story, which started around 3 years back. I was working for a tier 1 organization, and they were building a cloud-native application with Kubernetes as the hero and the main component. So it was all cloud and Kubernetes as their backbone. So I was given a task to facilitate an offensive security engagement on Kubernetes. Now, it was my first ever offensive security on Kubernetes. So I did my prep work. I organized a meeting with the key stakeholders and started about talking about the walkthrough and the prep work and boundaries of the engagement. So we were sitting in a room full of DevOps engineers and geeks, project managers, architects, and myself talking about the walkthrough and looking at the scoping. But the consistent messaging coming from the project team was, hey, Kubernetes, it's all secure by design. Hi, Kubernetes, there's no way to break into cluster. We have all like vendors like Google and Amazon protecting it. And the last one was, I still remember, is there even a value add doing such engagements? We don't see any value add. So that meeting crushed me, man. That was the hardest meeting I've ever seen in my life. It crushed me for multiple reasons. So first reason was that I was made to feel that there is no place for an offensive security professional like myself in the world of Kubernetes. And I was kind of told that, hey, you can't do it. There's no way you can do it, so please go and enjoy your checklist-based works. And you know what I said? Let me do it, and let me take it as a challenge. I did that engagement. I was so crushed because of that meeting, because I was made to feel that there's no place, and also there is no way to break into cluster. But I did that engagement, and the results were so amazing that I got called by the CISO for the best engagement done ever. So that was pretty good. I'm so thrilled to be present here and sharing all my research and hands-on experience on attacking and defending Kubernetes cluster. So let's dive in. Well, my name is Sanjeev Mahajan, and I am currently working as a principal cloud security engineer with Cyber Services, cyber with an S. And I have been in industry for more than 15 years now. Please don't go by my looks. I started off as a system admin and then moved into the world of security, which I have been doing for the last 10 years. For the past few years, I have been heavily involved in the world of Kubernetes, both as an attacker and defender. So unfortunately, I only have 40 minutes, so I won't be able to share everything. But what I'll do is I'll touch upon small pockets of the most insightful learnings I've gained over my experience in attacking and defending Kubernetes cluster. All right. That brings us to the agenda of today's talk. We'll talk about what is Kubernetes cluster, the common misconceptions in the industry when it comes to Kubernetes security, and then look at attack chains on real-world Kubernetes environment. Then we'll also look at the defense in-depth strategy, how to enhance your security posture when it comes to Kubernetes, and then conclude with key takeaways. Quick disclaimer before we begin. I'll be referring a lot of project teams like DevOps, project managers. By no means I'm here to disrespect any of the teams. They're doing an amazing job, and I love them all, and I have learned a lot. They're only for reference purpose. I would be using certain security tools, both open source and commercial. But again, I'm not here to endorse any of the tools. I am only referring them for the references. And then there would be the examples and the list shown in the entire presentation are not exhaustive. They are only for, I've picked up the most significant ones. Yep. All right. So let's talk about Kubernetes. And since Kubernetes started its wide adoption in the technology term in the world of cloud-native applications, unfortunately, it has been called by so many names. Some like to call it as K8s cluster. Some would just say it's a cluster, while others would call it as Kubernetes cluster, or I've even heard Kube cluster. Now, if you hear any of these terms today from myself or somebody in future, they mean the same thing, so don't get worried if they're calling different names. All right, you have heard me saying Kubernetes a lot. Now, what is exactly Kubernetes? So Kubernetes is, as a technical term, it says it's a container orchestration tool. Now, what does it mean? It means that a set of machines working together to deploy, manage, and run your containerized workloads. Pretty simple, right? But I like to call it as a party planner for your software. Now, why do I do that? So party planner, it takes care of everything, so you can focus on building great softwares. All right, so if I were to talk about some significance of Kubernetes, and why are we talking about Kubernetes so much? So according to one of the reports, 71% of Fortune 100 global companies are already using Kubernetes as its main container orchestration tool. So with wide adoption of cloud-native stack, Kubernetes has become a de facto standard. For example, like if you go to an organization, people say, do you have Splunk? Instead of asking, do you have SIM? So that's how Kubernetes is like a container orchestration de facto standard. And another big article from Cloud Native Foundation said, it's an emerging operating system of the cloud. So it's like a backbone of cloud. Wherever you have containers, you have your containers workloads, you'll see Kubernetes. So now, if I were to summarize, or if I were to break down the Kubernetes into, as I said earlier, it's a set of machines. So whatever you're seeing on the screen right now, it's a control plane. So it's the brain of the cluster. It is made up of few components. I'd like to briefly describe them. So in the center you see is the API server. So API server is a machine that exposes the Kube APIs, Kubernetes APIs, to system accounts, user accounts, and administrators. So, and you use a tool called kubectl to interact with API server. Then the bottom line is the scheduler. So scheduler is responsible for scheduling pods onto nodes. We'll talk about pods and nodes in the later slide. On the left-hand side is the etcd. etcd is responsible. It's a distributed key value store which stores your configuration cluster data. And it's favorite of attackers because it has some sensitive data. So attackers are always after that thing. Then you have your control manager, which is responsible to maintain the healthy state of cluster. So it looks at the state and takes corrective actions if required to maintain a healthy state. Now, on the right-hand side, if you see on the screen, is your worker nodes. It's also called as nodes or worker nodes. So these are the compute devices of the cluster. They host your containers, which are running your containerized workloads. I won't go into details of every component here, but the most important ones are the pods and containers that are working in the nodes. And pods are your smallest deployable units when it comes to your Kubernetes applications. And it may contain one or multiple containers, whereas containers are like small, lightweight packages that have all the utilities to run the piece of software. Now, if I were to circle back on my example of party planner, just treat control plane as the master staff or head staff of the party planner, which takes care of is the venue set properly. And the cards are distributed on time for guests, whereas the nodes are your staff working on ground, making sure they cater to the needs of the guests properly. All right. Now, we have seen, like, while interacting with different clients and different organizations, there were so many misconceptions when it came to Kubernetes security. And we will talk about it in our coming slides. So the most common observation was, hey, Kubernetes is all secure by design, and second one was that we don't it's all cloud service providers' responsibility to make Kubernetes secure, so we don't need to do anything. But what you see, let me tell you, that's not the case. It has never been the case. It's always been a shared responsibility model. So cloud service provider only takes care of the security of the infrastructure, whereas everything else like data security or your network layer controls, your access controls, IAM controls, they all sit with a client's responsibility. And that's where we have seen that most of the misconfigurations happen. And because of the misconfigurations, a lot of attack happens in the world of Kubernetes because of those misconfigurations. So that was a common observation. And another very common misconception was, hey, we don't need offensive security engagement, or what is the value add? There's no value add we see in the offensive security engagements on Kubernetes. On the screen, you see are the top 10 security risks we identified in real-time engagements. And they were, like, the severity of these findings were critical to high, and they had such a significant impact on the business that some of the findings were required to have a solution design change. And they were not enough, like a single remediation was not enough to fix those findings. So they were pretty critical. And once we did the engagements for the clients, they got to know that there is a great value add on doing offensive security and on regular basis. All right, I think I still got all of you with me, because now we are going to move the most exciting section, which is attacking real-world Kubernetes. I can go on and on with this because I've done this in the past for nights and days. But before that, I would like to give you a quick summary. When I was investigating on attackers' mindset, like why do attackers go after Kubernetes, and what sort of mindset they have when they're doing it? So I got to know that every attacker's mindset is different when it comes to Kubernetes. Some would be after compromising the entire cluster, because once you have entire cluster compromised, you could go anywhere, you could do anything. But some attackers only go after specific attacks like data exfiltration or lateral movement attacks. So we need to understand that every mindset is different and every attack is different. So we always, when we are attacking Kubernetes, we go after with different objectives and not just compromising cluster. So with that, we'll jump into our first attack chain. So the first one was about, we were sitting with a client. The first thing he said, look, I don't want you to report me anything on non-production environment. We know non-production is not safe, it's fine. Give me findings only on the production setup. We said, OK. Second thing was, we have all the security tools in place. We have a big team configuring the cluster for us. So we are pretty mature. We are tightly logged environment. Now, you tell us, you plug into an environment and tell us how far can you go. So it was like an open-ended, like CFP or like a capture the flag moment for us. It was like, OK. It was like a challenge given to us. Now, before I go into the technical details of this attack chain, I would like to give you a quick example how we were able to attack. So simple, like a story. So just imagine your house as a Kubernetes cluster. Now, you have put every possible security control in your house, and then you hire me, say, Sanjeev, hey, can you attack my house? And grab those 24-karat gold coins sitting in one of the rooms. I say, OK, give me the access to your, as we'll start the exercise, but as an attacker, I know I won't be able to reach anywhere because you have all the security controls in place, right? So what I do was, I do investigation around what else is possible. So I know that there is a spare key of your house that sits in your friend's house. You have given that spare key to your friend's place because in case of emergency, you might use it. Now, I know your friend's place is not secure. So what I do is, I go, compromise your friend's place, grab those keys, come back, get access to your house, and get those tokens as like the 24-karat gold, sorry. So that's how we were able to do this attack. All right, so first thing first, we started our reconnaissance in full phase. We were like going crazy, like what can we find? What are the possible services, pods, everything, every possible resource in the Kubernetes that was given to us. What happened after that was, Nothing. The client was right. There was no misconfiguration in the Kubernetes environment. We were stuck. We were like, OK, God, what do we do? We can't go back to client and say, hey, you were right. What do you think? I would have said, OK, client, you're right. Here's the report. There's no findings. We did not stop there. What we did, we tried to look around the Kubernetes. And what we saw was there was one single pod in the entire cluster that was running with cluster admin privileges. Sorry, you got me. So there was one pod running in the entire cluster with cluster admin permissions. Now we knew that this is the hot target. This is the target we need to go after because we get the token of this pod. We are in a good position. We compromise the entire cluster. But how do we do that? It's sitting in the production cluster safely. So we did further investigation. It's not moving. All right, so what we found was there was another CI/CD pipelines. There was CI/CD ecosystem integrated to the Kubernetes cluster. And there was one runner that was privileged. That was privileged with the role of get secrets permission on the production cluster. Now, you remember I told you about a friend. So this misconfigured runner was that friend which had that spare key. So our next target was how do we get access to this runner? And if we get access to this runner, we use the access token and then use it to extract the token of the pod and then compromise cluster. So the naming convention of the runner helped us because we wanted to identify the repository that runner was mapped to. So we used the naming convention of the runner, and we identified the repository. Easy. Now we go to the repository. We know that there's a runner there. We need to get the access token of that runner. But in the repository, there was all PRs, approvals, and whatnot. So we can't raise a PR to say, hey, we need the access token. So what do? We got another challenge. So what we did was, there is a feature in GitHub repositories that you can create local branches. Now we saw that was our lucky day, that local branch access was given to everybody on the network. So anybody can create local branches. So what we did, we created a local branch. We wrote our custom exploit. And using that custom exploit, we extracted the token of the CI runner. And there it was. We had the CI runner token with us from the logs. We then replayed that token. And using that CI runner token, we were able to grab the token of the pod, which was running in the production cluster. And we had the access token of our pod. And that's it. We were able to compromise the entire cluster, the production cluster, because we could read, write, execute whatever we want to in the production cluster. Obviously, we were really happy with our output, but you know who wasn't happy. So what were the lessons learned? What did we learn from this exercise? So first thing first, make sure you have your strong authentication and authorization in place. So always have your strong authentication. For example, if we were not able to create local branches and there were some controls that did not allow everyone to create local branches, we would have been stopped there. So we could have prevented that attack. Another control we learned about was least privilege IAM. So when we were investigating why this attack happened, we got to know that there was one engineer who accidentally gave that runner get secrets permission instead of list secrets. So you have confusing permissions in Kubernetes. Where there is a get secret, which lets you see the value, whereas list secrets lets you see the metadata. So if you get list secrets access, it's like you can't do much, whereas get secrets give you the actual value. So due to that confusing wordings of the permissions, the DevOps engineer gave get secrets instead of list. So making sure you review and have your least privilege IAM roles for service accounts and user accounts. Another control that we learned was network policies. So you always make sure you have a stringent network policy. Like the way we were able to access the production cluster directly from using the tokens, we should not be allowed to do that. We should have jump box access when it comes to production environment. So that 3 controls were really important to block this attack. All right, we just saw that how we were able to compromise the entire cluster using almost like no access at all. But what we saw from that attack was that we still could not access the production buckets, like the storage buckets. We did not have rights to do that. Now, the next challenge given to us in our next engagement was, hey, can you break out of the cluster You're already in a cluster. Can you break out and get me the storage buckets access? Can you get me a read-write access on the storage buckets which has all the sensitive data? And again, it was only production storage buckets that the client was interested in. So we started our reconnaissance, the basics, and what we saw on the surface was everything was pretty secure. Again, when it comes to Kubernetes, based on my experience, on the surface, everything looks perfectly fine. They're always secure on the surface. So we saw that the non-prod cluster, there was nothing to talk to the production storage buckets directly. So, but again, when we do a deep dive, we got to know something. So what we did was another investigation, and further investigation showed that there was single pod in the entire sea of, or like the ocean of pods, which was running with a storage admin rights. So we got to know that there's storage admin pod running in the non-production, but how do we check, does it have access to production setup or not? So we ran our exploits, and we got access to that pod. And once we had the shell access to the pod, what we did was, there was a beautiful curl sitting there. We ran that curl utility and ran the metadata API calls and extracted the token. Now, again, we had the token, and now we wanted to just validate, does it have production or non-production? And it was our lucky day. That particular access token had access to non-production and production buckets. And there it was. We had full access to your storage buckets because that pod was running with storage admin privileges. Again, it should never be doing that, but for that, some reason, I'll tell you what was the reason. So while we were doing this investigation, we got to know that the developer had accidentally given access because there was some incident in the production environment. So that particular pod was given access to the production buckets, storage admin rights, only for that troubleshooting that particular incident. But the developer forgot to revoke it, and it was sitting there, and everybody was thinking, who will touch this pod? Because it's all secure by design. All right, what did we learn this time? We got to learn that you need to conceal your metadata APIs. It comes by default in your containers in the Kubernetes world, but some pods which do not require, so you need to do some threat modeling and business angle to it to see if some pods don't require metadata API calls, please block them. It can be done through network policies. So people who say can't be done, I would love to talk to them. Another lesson that was learned, so least privilege IAM policies. This comes again and again, and trust me, this is the most important control when it comes to Kubernetes. You need to make sure that the controls, IAM controls you're giving has to be least privilege and reviewed thoroughly and on periodic basis. In this case, we saw that that pod did not need storage admin rights on the production cluster, but it was sitting there just waiting for us to get exploited. So least privilege IAM policy is a most important control. And then you have your distroless images. So make sure your container images are always distroless, if possible, because that reduces the blast radius. If there's no shell, you can't exec into the pods, and that's how it makes a lot of complication for the attackers to exploit it directly. So that's 3 controls we were able to learn this time. So we just saw that how we were able to exploit cluster admin, how we were able to compromise the entire cluster, and then we were able to break out of the cluster. But this attack chain talks about container escapes. Now, since ever I started in the world of Kubernetes, like attacking Kubernetes, my dream was to do container escape because every time I'd Google and top 10 risk, container escape always came on the front. But how do we do that? I had no idea. So this time we were given a target of, hey, you are in a container sitting in the Kubernetes cluster. Can you escape out of container? So we started our reconnaissance again. This time, we saw that in the entire cluster, there was nothing that could directly give us access to the host file system. So the target was simple, get a working shell on the node that is mounting all the pods. So again, when we were looking at doing some reconnaissance at surface level, everything was secure as always. So what we did was, we looked at deep dive into the pods configurations, and one of the pod we saw was running with privileged pod this time. So it was running with the permissions of, in the terms of configuration, if I were to talk, this was the configuration that pod was running with. So if you see in the screen, it was the privilege flag was set to true. So what does that mean? It means that that pod can basically talk to the host file system, and we can download the host file system onto the pod. So due to this misconfiguration, we were able to host the file system. So we collected all the file system and put it on the containers files directory, and we told to the client that, hey, we got the container escape, we have your all file system sitting on the nodes in our container. But the client said, no, that's not the case. I don't accept that because you don't have a working shell on the node. It's not achieved. We were not, it was a sad moment. So what we did was we extracted everything. We started investigating into what are the file systems we have extracted from that host. Again, doing some deep investigation on that particular file systems we extracted, we got to know that there was a pod which was running with permissions of create pod. So we used that access token from the host file system, created our own malicious pod, and gave all the possible findings. This is like a suicidal bomb. This is like putting suicidal bomb on the cluster. So never do that unless, if you find it, just raise it. Don't do it to make it secure. So we did this on purpose because when we deployed this pod, we got direct access to the shell of the worker node. And there it was, like after deploying, and thankfully that cluster had no security policies in enforce mode that blocked us from doing this misconfiguration. So we deployed this cluster on purpose, and what the next step was, we had a working shell on the worker node. And again, it was such a good, we were really happy with the output, and the client was too, because he expected this to happen. So now, what did we learn? So this time, there was a new learning. So the learning was, have your security policies in enforce mode. So what we saw was there were security policies, but always they were in audit mode. So make sure you have it in enforce mode. Audit mode does nothing to block your attacks. They only raise alerts which go nowhere, which we have seen on observation. So make sure you have your security policies in enforce mode. Another control, the most important control in that case was having your segregation of workloads. Make sure if you want to run some workloads which have like configurations running with privileged pods, make sure you segregate them on namespace basis or cluster basis. And distrustless container images, that is like the go-to control. So if you block the shell from the container, you reduce the blast radius to a great extent. It makes such complex for attackers that it is not easy to exploit. So as I told you earlier, I can go on and on. These attack chains I have been doing for ages, and in terms of like days and nights. But due to time constraints, I can only talk about the top 3 ones in details. I'm more than happy to chat afterwards on the rest of the attacks I'm showing on the screen. Please come and have a chat if you want. I'll be present in the hallway. So, all right, we have talked a lot about attacking Kubernetes, what are the great lessons you learned from attacking Kubernetes. But what we saw was when we were attacking, that the attack surface keeps on changing, and there's such a wide attack surface for Kubernetes that so you can't just rely on the lessons learned from attacking Kubernetes attack chains. So what we did was we saw that if we could bake some security controls into the world of Kubernetes in Kubernetes environment, that would be an all-round performance on safeguarding Kubernetes. Now, what we saw was, like, depending on Kubernetes, because there were so many resources, you can't put controls everywhere. So we divided our Kubernetes into 3 main stages. So we called it as Kubernetes lifecycle. And what we saw was there was a 3 main stages when it comes to Kubernetes environment. So the build stage, deployment, and the runtime. So as the name says, like in the build stage, you are always the focus of, So the build stage, as the name says, is you're building images. So the images are your base images from where you run your containers. So building your images in the build stage, then you have once your images are built, you push those images into a central repository where you save it. And then you have your deployment stage where you are deploying you're doing your provisioning to cluster, like you're doing your secrets management and you're doing your network policies. And then you have your runtime controls. As the name says, you're running your containerized workloads and managing the pod lifecycle. So let's talk about the key stages in the build time. So in the build stage, what you see is like the most important control are scanning your base images for vulnerabilities, because that's your foundation in Kubernetes. So having your base images being scanned for vulnerabilities is first important control. Then you always digitally sign them. Once you've scanned them, you sign your images and then for authenticity or for integrity checks. And then we always use trusted container registries. Like you have to have a container registry to store your integrity, your digitally signed images. Now let's see how you could do that. What are the tools in the market that could help you achieve that? All right, so for scanning your images, you could always use tools like Twistlock or Snake. Then you have your digitally signing tools like Cosign. You could use Cosign to digitally sign them. Then you have your trusted container registries. There are heaps of them. I've seen like JFrog, Artifactory. It would be a Google container registry or something coming from the AWS. So you could use that. Now, we just saw the build controls. Now let's talk about the deployment controls. So the deployment controls is, firstly, the most important is the secrets management. You saw like the attackers are always after your access tokens. So they use the access tokens to replay it. And in the Kubernetes world, it's always like the access tokens are meant to do that stuff. It's just like attacker abuse it to get access to sensitive data. So secrets management is first thing. And then you have your IAM controls. So we just saw that IAM controls are most important like when it comes to securing your cluster, because they prevent attacks like authorization bypass, or they could be something like attacks on your, sorry. I'll just take a sip, sorry. Yep. Sorry, it was a lot of drinks yesterday, so. So IAM controls are important because you see there's authorization controls. There are a lot of authorization and authentication piece in the Kubernetes, and there's so many integrity checks, integrity points when it comes to Kubernetes, for example, CI/CD, then you have your containers and other components. So having IAM controls and reviewing them is the most important control. You just keep them. It's not a silver bullet that, hey, I have a least privilege IAM. You have to review them on periodic basis. We have seen that it doesn't happen. It happens only in theories, but in the books. So make sure you do that. Then have network policies. This is important because network policies, we have seen, like if there is a network policy misconfigured, attackers can do a great damage. We have done ourselves like attacks like data exfiltration that keeps on coming, and in the form of like data breaches as well. So due to the misconfiguration in network policies, attacks like data exfiltration, implanting backdoor happen. So network policies is a key control. Now let's see how we could achieve them. So the most important way is you have tools like HashiCorp Vault from third party. So, or there are tools integrated into the vendors like GKE has, I think, GSM, Google Service Secret Manager. So use those controls. When you have IAM, make sure you have RBAC, and you have your least privileged controls in place and review them on periodic basis. When it comes to network policies, make use of tools like Cilium and Calico. They are good tools to use. For the runtime controls, again, when it comes to runtime, your applications are running in the containers. What you could do, the good part is you could have your security assessments. So security assessments, like offensive security assessments, we talked about having your clusters attacked and hammered. Then you have your defensive security assessments, like you could use your config reviews on thoroughly basis. You could use tools like, there are tools called Kube Hunter or Kube Admin. A lot of tools there in the market that could be used for config reviews. Then you have security policies that, like, we have seen that a lot of organizations use security policies, but they're only in audit mode. Make sure you use it in enforce mode, because that's how they block the attackers. Then you have your runtime threat detection. So runtime threat detection, that was a really good story behind it. So we were running an attack sitting next to a SOC or the DevOps team, and we were pushing a malicious file, like a virus file. And they were not, they had a runtime threat detection, but it was not configured properly. The policies and the rules were not set. So we did it on the fly, on the real time, and we saw that the malicious file, in theory, it said that runtime threat detection is catching every possible like malware if it's pushed to container, but it wasn't running because it was misconfigured. So have your runtime threat detection and configure it properly. So let's see the tools. Oh, sorry. So the tools, as I discussed, security assessments, offensive and defensive assessments. Threat modeling is important because that helps your attackers, your attacking team to focus on the crown jewels. Because when it comes to Kubernetes engagements, you only have limited time, and you need to focus on your crown jewels, not the low-hanging fruits. That tool can take care. But if you're doing some assessment, make sure you have threat modeling done and crown jewels are selected for the pen testers or the offensive security teams. Security policies, you can always use prod security admission controllers or OpenGate. I've seen it working really well. And runtime threat detection, Twistlog and sysdig secure, they're good tools. But make sure you configure them properly. Just don't rely on, hey, we have a tool, and that's it. Configuration is important. All right, so a lot of stuff, right? I know it's a lot to take. So I would summarize. So there is a way to attack, and just don't rely on like some checklist when it comes to attacking Kubernetes. Go out of your sky's the limit when it comes to Kubernetes. Don't sit within the boundaries when it comes to your attacking Kubernetes. Attack is definitely possible. When it comes to your defending Kubernetes, there is no silver bullet. Every environment is different. And so in a summary, attack and defenses are always the key elements when it comes to Kubernetes. And now, if we were to talk about like a quick piece of advice for attacking team. So attacking team, I would say, I've done it myself, so make sure you don't restrict yourself to just attacking Kubernetes. What you do instead, you make sure you look at the integrity points, you look at the entry and exit points, and make sure you do a solution walkthrough sitting next to security architects and DevOps, and because they are the best when it comes to describing the solution. And point like when you're doing a field work, make sure you look at all the solution and not just Kubernetes. Another piece of advice for attacking team is making sure you focus on the blast radius. Don't just go after, hey, we found a network policy which was misconfigured. I like to call it as what next? What can you do from there? So if you have a misconfigured policy, make sure you go one step ahead and exploit it. If there's a policy that says you can make connection to, for example, an AWS, can you try and go after exploiting, do a data exfiltration tag and putting the data onto S3 bucket? So that's the piece of advice for attacking team. For the blue teamers, the defending champions, I would say defense in depth is your key weapon. Make sure, again, as I said, there's no silver bullet. Every environment is different. And analyze your environment, and look at your organization's risk appetite, and have your defense in depth strategy. And I've seen it working really well. As an attacker, I hate it because it blocks a lot of my attacks. But being ethical and being an ethical hacker, the defense in depth strategy has worked really well, and it helps enhance the security posture. For organizations, so the key takeaway for organizations is Kubernetes is not secure by design. Whoever says that is not giving the right message. And having your regular offensive security and defensive security assessments is a must. You can't deny the fact it's not required, so it's a must for an organization. All right. Would like to start with a big thanks to my mentor. She just left. She had to go for somewhere. So Lydia, she invested a lot of time and experience with me. That's why I'm able to stand and talk in front. Otherwise, I would never submit this talk. So big thanks to her. And big thanks to you all. You were a great audience. And big thanks to AUSCERT for giving me the platform to talk and share my journey. I hope you all loved my work and my the journey and the information I've shared today. And I'm 100% sure there will be a lot of meetings when you go back to office on Monday with the people who have been saying it's secure by design, and you will be revisiting your cluster configs. So thank you so much, AUSCERT. That was a pleasure.
Thanks. Great. It's great talk, Sanjeev. We're out of time. Here's a little gift from AUSCERT.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again. And there was quite a few questions. So some questions are really good. So maybe you catch Sanjeev before the end of the conference, or you can look him up on LinkedIn. I saw a slide earlier on.
Yep.
And this talk will be recorded. What is recorded? I hope it's recorded. And it'll be up online. So yeah, thanks, Sanjeev, again.
Thank you so much.